In the second phase of media research, research focused on the effect that the media had on voting, and this is particularly among political scientists. And what I want to suggest before I explain the dominant view, which was referred to as the minimal effects theory, or for some people it was called the limited effects theory, is the idea that whereas the hypodermic needle theory was like the pendulum swinging too far in one direction, where it stated that the media was incredibly powerful, people were like powerless to go ahead and defend themselves against the media. I think it's fair to say that the minimal effects theory was the pendulum swinging back to the other side, and probably too far in that direction as well. And what you'll find is in the third phase of media research, when we talk about the subtle effects theory, I think that's where research on the media kind of has found its sweet spot and more accurate and more representative of the power the media actually has. So let's talk about the minimal effects theory. People who subscribed to the minimal effects theory believed that the media had a very limited direct effect on political preferences. That far from being this incredibly powerful force, that the media actually had a kind of limited effect. And one of the reasons that they came to this conclusion was because they did a study that was later turned into a book called The People's Choice. And The People's Choice examined the 1940 presidential election. What these theorists did, what these political scientists did, is they found that there was a city, I believe it was in Ohio, Erie. The city was Erie. I think it was in Ohio. In any case, and one of the things that was interesting for them about Erie was that the city voted exactly the way the population voted in like the last 4 or 5 presidential elections. So for example, if in the last if the presidential election was 52% in favor of the Republican, 48% in favor of the Democrat, that's how this city voted. And if the following election, it was 62% for the Republican and 38% for the Democrat, that's how this city voted. All the way through for 4 elections. And so political scientists thought, you know what? Here's what we have. We have this perfect little microcosm of the country. Let's study it and we'll get an idea of how people make their decisions on how to vote. And so they went to the city and they basically randomly selected doors. Like I think they did every 5th door, and they interviewed people and they asked them questions about where they got their political news, who they talked to, who they trusted, who they didn't trust, all this, how they thought they were going to vote in the upcoming 1940 election, all this stuff. And they followed them all the way through the campaign. This was an interesting campaign because it was when President Roosevelt was actually going to run for his 3rd time, which was breaking a tradition that people had only run for 2 terms because George Washington had run for 2 terms. So, but that's not relevant to what we're talking about. So they kept track of who people talked to, who they discussed with politics, what they read in the news, what they listened to on the radio, all this stuff. And they wanted to see, especially if there was any connection between how much people were exposed to the media and how they ultimately voted at the end. One of the things they found is that there was no connection between exposure to the media and how citizens voted. That exposure to the media didn't change how citizens voted, but they did notice something. They noticed that exposure to opinion leaders could change how people voted. Now, what do I mean by opinion leaders? Opinion leaders aren't people on the radio or people in the newspaper who you trust. That's not what they meant by opinion leaders. Opinion leaders were people in your community who you knew and you trusted. They might be your pastor, your reverend, your rabbi, your imam. They might be city council member that you happen to know. It might be your Uncle Joe, who you think this guy pays attention to politics all the time and he's somebody I trust. It could be your mom or your dad or your grandfather. People who were exposed to the media, who you knew paid attention all the time and you trusted them. What they found in the People's Choice was that exposure to opinion leaders could change how people voted. They referred to this as, and let me get my face out of here. They referred to this as the two-step flow theory, right? Whereas the hypodermic needle theory proposed the idea that the media had a direct and powerful influence on individuals coming right from the media to individuals. The two-step flow acknowledged that communication is a more complex process. And on the right-hand side, you can see their sort of flow chart where they show the media at the very top. And then their influence goes down to these opinion leaders. And these opinion leaders then talk to individuals. The way we would talk about it in communications theory and in political science is we would say that the opinion leaders are mediating the influence of the media. The media is informing them because they're the ones who are paying attention to politics all the time. They're the ones who are interested. They're reading the papers. They're back then, they're reading the papers, they're reading magazines, they're listening to the radio. Some people were probably watching television, but it wasn't as widely spread. And so it's those people and how they interpret what the media is doing. And then when they communicate to people, that's where the media comes in. And so it's not really the media influencing things, it's these opinion leaders. Because if there's something in the media that says this is true about a presidential candidate, and Uncle Joe is your opinion leader, Uncle Joe hears it and he's like, that's not true. When he's talking to you about the election, he's not going to talk to you about what the media said. But if the media said something that he thought was true about one of the presidential candidates, he would communicate that to you or whoever is in your circle of friends. So the idea was that the media didn't really have much impact on its own. It's these opinion leaders who were exposed to the media, who were immersed in politics, who were paying attention. They were the ones shaping how people voted. They were the ones who could have an impact. And this is very different than the hypodermic needle theory, where whatever the media puts out, people are immediately directly and powerfully influenced by the media. The next phase of research is referred to as the subtle effects theory. And if the hypodermic needle theory went too far in one direction, maybe the minimal effects theory went too far in the other direction. The subtle effects theory is kind of like the sweet spot, as I said in the last video, sort of where we are now. It's a more nuanced understanding of the impact of the media. And that's where that's what I want to talk about in the next video, the subtle effects theory. And then we'll talk about the agenda setting effect, the priming effect, and framing effects.